It's important to remember your most sensitive data assets represent real people who are depending on you to protect their privacy. Organizations who remember this, who care enough to protect people's privacy, earn trust. And earned trust ultimately allows you and your organization to drive innovation in ways that benefit everyone, including improvements in patient care.
Morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. Just let everyone sit down. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha Lauer. I head up marketing at Soda, and I'm happy to be co-producer of this track with my peer there, Lakshmi Randall. I'm here to welcome you to track 4, which is Actionable Insights, translating data to actionable insight for the enterprise. And our first session, which is the CDO's Actionable Framework to share sensitive data. So before handing over to this stellar panel of moderators, I just wanted to introduce them for you. So maybe you can each give a wave when I say your name. So the moderators we have today are Jordan Collins, and Jordan is Data Privacy Solutions Business Leader at Privacy Analytics. And he's joined by, in the nick of time, Michael Conlin, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Definitive Logic. And the panelists today are Mike Branch, Vice President of Analytics and Data at Geotab, Doug Lee, Vice President of Enterprise Data, Analytics, Data Science, Healthcare at, my autocorrect updated your company name, I'm sorry. Thank you, Sidus Insights. And Len Usvyat, who is Vice President of Applied Data Science, Biostatistics, and Epidemiology at Fresenius Medical Care. All right. So before we get started, just some housekeeping for you. The session is being broadcast online. It will be recorded, so available afterwards. We've got time allocated for Q&A, so we'll do that in the room, and we're also expecting a few questions from our online attendees. So without further ado, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. So today we will be talking about issues surrounding the reuse and sharing of data, specifically sensitive data. As we all know, the societal benefits that can be derived through greater innovation and results of analyzing such sensitive information are immense. But we find that many organizations struggle to really find the appropriate ways of justifying the reuse of such data. So today we have our 4 members here, so 3 panelists, and then Michael and I are the co-moderators, and we will be sharing real-world experiences with the safely reusing data, and specifically talking about strategies and tactics for identifying, substantiating, and communicating compelling reasons for the sharing and reuse of data. So maybe I will, actually the slides aren't up yet. Would it be possible to put the slides up? Thank you very much.
There we go.
There we go. Yes, so these are our presenters here. You can see us all. We've been introduced. And I would mention that the presenters are members of the Executive Advisory Board for building trusted data solutions to drive innovation. And this is a Executive Advisory Board that's been facilitated and supported by Privacy Analytics. And so we have other members of the board who are showing up here. And a lot of the discussions that we'll be having today during the session are derived from meetings that the board has been holding over the past 2 years.
And if I may, I'd like to say what a privilege it is to be part of this board. Not only because Privacy Analytics is such a well-respected organization, but because my fellow professionals who I work with on the board are distinguished, they're insightful, they're smart, they're smarter than me. I get to learn a lot every time I come to a board meeting. And as those of you who have worked with me before no, I adore the chance to learn and grow. It's really important for me. And so it's a real privilege to be part of the board and to be part of the board's presentation here today.
Thanks, Michael. And actually, I might turn it over to you if you would like to introduce the agenda for today.
I'd be delighted to. So I do want to take a moment to thank everybody for coming. We think we have an interesting topic, and you heard early in the discussion with the CDO, the Department of Defense, and the CDO of Department of State, this exact issue about sharing sensitive data. Of course, they have some very sensitive data. Well, we thought that it can be helpful to have a way of looking at it from a constructive fashion, and so we constructed a framework through which you can consider the issues and the options when it comes to sharing sensitive data. We're going to work our way through these three big topics from left to right as you look at the screen. We're going to talk about first, how do you identify that data in the first place? What are the issues and dynamics with respect to identifying it, selecting it, and so forth. Then we're going to get into substantiating the data, and in each of these we'll call on our panel members to share some highlights. As we all know, data professionals here, data practitioners here, the substantiating may be the trickiest part because data quality becomes critical to everything that you do throughout this. And finally, how do you communicate not only the data, but the value of the data to your stakeholders so that you can get support and approval, so that you can get the data used correctly, released, approved, et cetera. Now, we've got colleagues here who I've worked with when I was in the Department of Defense and who have had to deal with very sensitive data. So they understand the challenge of communicating that value as well. So we're going to work our way through these. We'll call the panel members to help share some of their own professional stories and insights as we go. How's that?
That sounds perfect.
Start?
Yes, thank you. Excellent. That's the way we'll do it. So if you want to introduce the first one.
So we're going to launch into the first topic, which is all about identifying the data in the first place. And there are a range of challenges in every organization, whether you're the DoD, which is the largest, most complex organization on the planet, or whether you're in a mom and pop shop. Being able to identify that data, understanding who are the owners from a business perspective, who's responsible for the quality of the data, who's responsible for the meaning behind that data, what are the constraints that those business owners of the data impose on it, and what are the constraints that they're not imposing today, but perhaps they should be imposing on that data. Because as we know, some elements of PII and PHI are pretty obvious, but others are less obvious and no less dangerous. You take 2 or 3 elements of data and you can create PII if they're the right elements of data. And you begin to expose yourself to de-anonymization attacks, and there are a number of those now widely available, just like every other algorithm out there, widely available through open source code. And then you have all the cultural issues, all right? So Dwayne's got a set of data over here, and Nancy's got a set of data over there, and now how do I get them to be willing to share, to trust the other, to verify that when the data is shared, it will be managed and handled appropriately with the correct controls, the correct security mechanisms, and so forth. All of these issues need to be dealt with from the very beginning. And then you get to the question of, do I have enough data now to make a decision on, and what level of confidence can I have in my decision? And so we've identified a number of strategies that you can apply as you work your way through this. And you can see we've put them up for you. The important thing from a data practitioner lens is that you're taking a structured approach. There's a lot of variability that we can't cover in 20 to 30 words on a slide, but taking a structured approach to these questions and these challenges, most of the time when you're find yourself dealing with these, you come to the conclusion that the reality is my organization's data governance isn't very strong in the first place. This is why I'm having trouble finding data. This is why I'm trouble finding owners. This is why I'm trouble confirming the rights around the data. And whether it's data governance or IT governance, in the end, if you just deal with the symptoms of the problem continues to perpetuate itself. And you need to go back to the governance structures themselves and get them organized and sorted if you want to get the good quality data. Let's acknowledge that and let's have a look at some of these strategies and tactics. So front-end processes, you heard even the kickoff speech talk about that a little bit. Data is a manufactured product. What's the quality of your manufacturing process for data? Is it good enough? Is it automated enough? Are you applying quality controls, et cetera? Do you have the cross-functional committee around risk that's looking from a number of different perspectives? Because of course it's when you begin to combine different data sets that you begin to create the interesting stuff, where you can find real patterns that alarm everybody that you found the patterns because they didn't want you to find the patterns. And we know about that, don't we? Yes. So I'm speaking to my CDO from the DoD colleagues. And then, getting it aligned with the mission, because in the end, if you're not serving the mission, it's going to be very difficult to make progress, or as much progress as you'd like to make. Harnessing your exercises back behind the organization's mission. Data sharing is nice to do. It's not a must-do unless it supports the mission. I seem to recall some conversations, Dwayne, that we had about exactly that. It was a bit of a challenge. And then the whole issue of data stewardship, of course. We want strong data stewardship, which is about sharing data in a predictable way, not about data ownership, which is about holding it back. If you think about the CDO role 10, 15 years ago, it was about holding data back. It was about protecting data. Now it needs to be about sharing it. So within that framework, let's talk about some real life experiences.
Absolutely. So I can kick us off. And so first of all, I come from a company called Geotab. So what we do is we're a connected vehicle platform. So we're connected to nearly 3 million vehicles across the globe. So you talk about some of the types of elements that aren't necessarily direct PII. Well, location data is a perfect example of that because it comes in so many different forms. And so we're doing work for some of the largest organizations out there, fleets of size, 1 all the way through to over 100,000. Running during the COVID pandemic, fleets have been a necessity to really keep everything, all the goods and services moving on the road. So we offer services for safety and for productivity and for compliance. And you can think about all the different data elements that are collected, right? So that data provenance is so crucial. So we're collecting everything from engine RPM to windshield wiper activation to people slamming on the brakes, and we're collecting 50 billion records at least every single day. So the volume of data, you have to have that right provenance, and you have to understand the lineage. You have to understand how it all comes together. But what I'm going to talk about is a bit about how we go about some of the data sharing mechanism, because we're sitting on this volume of data that it would be a shame not to use it for some good purposes, right? So as I'm designing safer cities, if I wanted to design more efficient cities, more efficient uses of roadways, connected vehicle data is a perfect way to do that kind of thing, but you have to do it in a responsible way, right? If we're looking at electrifying the nation and understanding where charging infrastructure needs to go, I need to understand the loads on the vehicles, what is the weight of the vehicles, what routes do they take, but again, doing this in a privacy compliant manner. So how do we do that? Well, we first started off, we really had to identify where are the opportunities that really come to play, right? If we're looking at opportunities, how does that align with our mission statement, and how do we build trust within our own organization, but also within our customer base? And how can we develop systems whereby we can use this transportation analytics data for good? So one of the first things that we did is we established a data risk committee. It was important to bring everybody in the organization along for the ride, right? So at first we actually weighted it quite heavily. So we had legal representation, we had privacy, technology, but we omitted the business side at first. And what that led to was a very skewed take on where we could go. We decided to include the business side after a few iterations. And I will say, when we first started meeting, the meetings were at a very tight cadence. We were meeting every single week to hash out, what do we believe we can do? What if I were to put the hat of my customer on and understanding how data is leveraged and used, would this be an acceptable use case, right? So you have to think about from so many different perspectives. One of the things I think that we did well is that we actually put a data privacy specialist. So I run the data and analytics team, so on our team in specific, and that person was dedicated to our team and works very closely with that data risk committee. And that built up a lot of trust. But I will say it didn't happen overnight. It happened over a period of months and years as we're starting to build the trust in what we can do, what we can't do. And eventually we get to a cadence where we're meeting typically on a quarterly basis, except for areas where there are needs that are a little bit more pertinent to the business. And what that led to us launching last year is a new line of business, Geotab Intelligent Transportation Systems. We launched in September of 2021. And this is based on a lot of the effort that this cross-functional committee put together in understanding the different privacy challenges. Location data is very, very difficult to work with. So how do you do motivated intruder attacks, risk re-identification determination? The fact that you are putting out aggregate data, to your point, doesn't always mean that it's going to be 100% privacy compliant. You have to make sure that you're running these different attacks as a motivated intruder would. So I think for us, identifying the opportunities that fit well with our culture and building that trust within the organization and building that trust with our customers, that was a crucial element to this story.
And I think that the data practitioners in the room would love to hear if you could peel the onion just a little around the challenge of location data, because we know location data in your case is very much transportation data.
Yeah.
In other words, it's my route. It's my route to homework, shopping, the doctor's offices I go to, and as we've discussed in the board, this is very personal data. It tends to be more unique than a fingerprint in statistical terms. So anonymizing that kind of data is non-trivial.
It is absolutely non-trivial, very, very tricky. And I will say that location data should not be treated the same globally, right? There's different classes of location data. For instance, I'm a Canadian, so Mike stopping off to get his Tim Hortons, going from house to Tim Hortons, going to his office in the morning, that absolutely, every single piece of that breadcrumb is very much private data, right? The fact that at a busy intersection in Toronto, again, I'll use the Toronto example, where people are slamming on the brakes consistently and there's an issue with that intersection, the fact that it's happened with multiple people, multiple customers, that is aggregated, both location specific, but very, very different use cases. One can be used to further advance safety scenarios within a community, and the other is very personal data. So we actually released a white paper earlier this year with Deloitte in partnership. It was called Getting Telematics Data Right. And it talks about this, the discrepancy between different kinds of location data and the different techniques you can use. If you use different techniques, like adding noise to data through things like differential privacy, it's a little problematic depending on the situation that you want to look at, right? If you're looking at providing transportation analytics and understanding corridor analytics for a specific intersection, you need to be pretty precise with that data. Otherwise, you're giving false impressions of what's actually happened. So all that to be said, there's different categories, and we look at each case very, very differently, and it's not a blanket one size fits all.
No.
Yeah.
And then if I may, one final thought. You then have to consider what happens when somebody else releases data that is somehow complementary to yours. We saw yesterday on social media the ACLU reporting that the Department of Homeland Security has been buying hundreds of billions of cell phone records from the providers completely in contravention of the 14th Amendment without warrant. But that data is now in somebody else's hands. So what happens when there's other data that gets out there and can be combined perhaps with your data? Not your in particular, Mike, but data that any of us might put out there as data practitioners.
Absolutely.
Yeah, serious issues.
Michael, do you mind if I just chime in a little bit as well? So as a matter of background, so we are a large dialysis organization. We treat about almost 400,000 patients globally, and we're a global company, so it makes data sharing particularly complicated when you provide dialysis in all kinds of countries with all kinds of regulations. And one thing that you certainly said is the whole intracompany data sharing agreement. So we have, probably for a couple of years now, we've set up something very similar where we get our lots and lots of attorneys and data attorneys and privacy attorneys and compliance attorneys and a bunch of other folks, privacy officers together, and it's a pretty routine activity. So for us, I think it's every couple of weeks, and we review all the various projects and requests that we have to share data. So I do think that process has worked really well for us, is the importance of getting everybody together. And then one of the things that we're also trying to do now is if you talk to, of course, legal folks, they'll make everything extra complicated, but there are some things that I think can be a little bit more simple. There's no confidential data involved. So we do try to categorize our activities into what I would call these green, yellow, red level of activities, so that it does create a little bit of a separation of how detailed do we want to dive in. If there's no real patient data in this analysis, if there's no identifiable information, do we really need to go through the same level of scrutiny that we would do if we were actually looking at this confidential information? So I would say, I think for us it worked really well, and I think it also builds a bit of trust from the various parties in the organization, because I think they know what everybody's working on. All these folks are invited to these meetings, so that has been very, very helpful for us, certainly.
And I think whatever tool you use to manage that as well, too, metadata management is so crucial to have that transparency across the board. Whatever you're classifying as directly identifiable PII, non-directly identifiable PII, because that helps the business owners compliance make those decisions as they have access to that full platform.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks for the discussion, everyone. Maybe we'll move on to the next topic. Does that work? Yeah? Good. All right. So the next topic at hand is substantiating. And as Michael noted, this is potentially the most challenging area when trying to come up with a compelling reason for reusing data and sharing data. And this is where we try not to lose the trust of various stakeholders by really coming up with the use case that will say, well, why does the data need to be shared? Well, what's the value that we're getting out of the data? Who's benefiting from it? And Len, I think that you had some specific examples you wanted to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let me I want to give a little bit of a background of who we are as a company, and because I think it will be important in understanding the story a little bit better. So again, we are a global dialysis company. We provide dialysis to almost 400,000 patients globally on a routine basis. We do this here in the US, and as I said, we do this in 40 plus countries around the world. For those of you who don't know, and hopefully nobody knows much about kidney disease, but if you do, if your kidneys fail, as many of you may know, or some of you may know, there is actually an ability to continue and living your life while you're on this therapy called dialysis. And basically dialysis is a procedure where you go 3 times a week, have your blood essentially taken out of your body, cleansed using the dialyzer, and then returned back to you, which is essentially what your kidneys do if they were able to function fully. So we do this procedure for, again, about 400,000 patients globally, 3,500 locations around the world, all kinds of places in Europe where GDPR is in effect, in the US, all over the world. And so, as you can imagine, for us, data sharing is a big topic. We constantly have patient data. The other thing I should say is because of the way the therapy is and the way dialysis is provided, it is very time intense, and it is also very data intense. We see patients 3 times a week for 4 or 5 years, sometimes 10 years in a row. So you can only imagine it's about 152 times a year that we see our patients for 4 hours every time. So lots and lots of patient data that has been accumulated over the years. And one of the big challenges for us always was, well, if we're seeing something in the North American data, in our US database with our physicians in the US and clinicians in the US, then can we do a similar analysis in UK? Can we do the same analysis in China or Australia? And as you can imagine, it's doable, but it's not very simple because you then, you have to share code. It becomes pretty complicated. And so one of the things that we realized fairly early on is it would be really great to be able to combine some of these databases together, to be able to take our data from US, from our clinics in the US, take our data from the other 40 plus countries that we operate in, and combine it into one database. And we were actually able to do this. This is back, probably 10 years ago that we got within our company, we're able to merge these different databases together, but then we also got a number of other academic partners to join with us on this activity, and we created one global database that we're now calling Mondo, where we do have a lot of this information. But the big question for us was, how do you do this and you still staying compliant with GDPR, you still staying compliant with HIPAA? And it was a big problem because from a medical standpoint, you can only imagine the power of these global databases. If you can see things in your data in the US, say blood pressure changes before patients go to the hospital, you would love to see if that happens also in our patients in China or in Australia or in UK or in Canada. But it's very difficult, again, to do that unless you can combine it all together. And so we, with the help of privacy analytics, they were able to give us some rules around what we can do with this data to actually make it compliant according to GDPR, which made our privacy officers extremely happy. And as I mentioned before, we have lots of privacy officers, legal experts, and all kinds of other folks in the organization who everybody has an opinion and everybody wanted to chime in. But they were very comfortable saying that, okay, we have somebody who is able to come in and tell us what to do with the data to actually make it anonymous according to GDPR. And so since then, which I think happened sometime in 2015, somewhere 2016, we've been able to publish over, I think, 40 different manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals where we're able to combine these databases and show how things sometimes vary or sometimes they're the same globally. So sometimes we see similar patterns, sometimes we don't. We've been able to tackle things like fluid overload and blood pressure control, which are various big issues for our dialysis patient population. Recently with COVID, this collaboration has become really critical because, again, I think as you can imagine, dialysis population is a little bit of a captive audience. Our patients have to come in for treatment 3 times a week. And so anytime somebody had COVID, we of course knew about it. And we're able to track that information in our databases. But again, the questions were, well, how do you bring this data together? We would love to see if what happens to, I don't know, if a certain blood type correlates with somebody having a more severe COVID, you would love to see if you can do the same thing in non-US data so that we can do this more globally. And again, by using a database and an approach that we've used, something like this Mondo database has been very helpful. And so since then, in the last couple of years, we've started another initiative where we realized, well, great, we have this consortium of our company as well as other institutions, but actually it'd be great just for us to get our things organized within the company and create this global database. And so we're now working on something called, we're calling Apollo database, which is essentially our internal global patient-level data of our patients that we're treating that has things like geography, where the patient is coming from. Obviously, it will not have all the, every minutia that I think would be considered PII or PHI, certainly, but we're still able to create something that is usable for us from a research and publication standpoint and to improve our, the care that we provide to our patients. So to me, it's been this whole process of understanding how to anonymize the data on the one hand, but on the other hand, still keeping it useful. This is, to me, always the big challenge. I think when we certainly worked with you guys, for example, I remember the question of season would come up. Well, is season important? How important is it to our research? What is the season that the patient is being dialyzed in? And again, for us, we knew that that was an important variable because there are some seasonal things that happen to our patients. So it's been, I think it's been like everything else, and as Mike said, I think it's really an evolution. We didn't know what we're doing in the first place. Certainly was very helpful to work with you guys, but it's there's no question in my mind that I think from a certainly clinical standpoint, combining databases makes it exponentially more powerful than just showing you data from one hospital or one little dialysis clinic somewhere in the US, that if you could show that the same things happen globally, it becomes a very powerful story.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. And a quick question, actually. Do you find that with the second time around it's going more smoothly because you have all of the global stakeholders aligned already? People are comfortable with the approach the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do think it's going a lot more smoothly, although I know it's taking a little bit of time, but that's because we need to maneuver. We have 120,000 employees, and we probably have an attorney for every 10 of those employees. So it's taking a little bit of time, but it is an important process to go through, and we know what the process is. And again, for a global company that has over the years developed in more of these silos, I mean, maybe it's a bad word, but European entity developed as one entity, US entity developed as another, even though we're one company, completely different databases, completely different structures. So that is what is taking time right now, but we know where we're going and where we're going to be, and again, I think there's a lot of excitement about this now. So
yeah, great.
Yeah, I think what's important is, at the end of the day, you really want to focus, right, on the problem at hand and be very transparent about that. And so there's a lot of, usually when I'm in internal discussions and, everyone starts asking the question, like, well, why are you doing it, right, at the end of the day, right? So you really need to justify it, be really clear with your intent, and also just start diving into it. There you go.
Well, actually, Doug, I think that's an important point because it tees us up for our third category that we're going to talk about here today, and that is communicating how you're sharing sensitive data, why you've chosen to share sensitive data, what sensitive data you're sharing, and so forth. So a range of communication issues here. Some of them are jurisdictional, as you heard from Lynn. And we've seen that the European Commission has been very assertive in terms of rules for data privacy, rules for the quality of trained AI algorithms, and so forth, way out ahead of the United States Congress. Now, as a citizen and a taxpayer, I can be very critical of my Congress. It's part of my patriotic duty to be critical of my Congress, and so I will do that. We're seeing a number of state legislatures be ahead of my Congress. We're seeing the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, being ahead of my Congress in terms of legislation and regulation to protect privacy. I don't know about you, but that's pretty embarrassing. And that's about as far as I can say about that without moving away from polite words. So we know that the jurisdiction's important. But we know that that's only where it begins. Communicating becomes really, really critical because in the end you have to sell it. You have to sell it to your bosses, you have to sell it to your peers, you have to sell it to your customers, you have to sell it to the public, because whether you're making decisions on data or sharing data, sooner or later, it's going to get judged. It's going to get judged in the court of public opinion, and it may get judged in the court of law, and you need to be on firm footing. All those lawyers will be of no avail then, unfortunately, by that point, right? But if you communicate first, then you're probably going to be in a good space. So now, since you got us off on that topic, why don't you take us a little bit deeper?
Sounds good. So I'll give it some background about Harris Computer. Harris Computer is, it consists of 4 verticals, right? One with utilities sector, one in the public sector, one in healthcare, and we have one vertical for Quebec. For its very specific, yes. So we won't dive into that topic at all. So I'm firmly planted in the healthcare space, and I have a brief, right? My brief was to understand, hey, we've never had this data before pulled together into one place. So my brief was easy, right? As I thought, hey, pull together everything into a data lake. sounds really simple. And then when we started diving into it, we quickly pulled the e-brake and we took a huge step back, right? We really needed to understand what we were dealing with. So in came all the lawyers and the privacy officers and the ethic officers and data officers, et cetera. And we really had to create and be very specific about what we were trying to achieve. So the goal for senior leaders was to monetize the data. And this data is coming from EMRs, EHRs, right? We acquired Allscripts 2 months ago and paid almost $1 billion for it. And so we're very excited about that acquisition. However, that's another problem altogether. And so where we're at right now is we needed to start with right from zero. And we need to initially communicate with both internal and external stakeholders, getting a third opinion from external lawyers as well, because it's good to have a breadth of opinion. But the key was for us to build a strong narrative, right? And get something that sort of resonated with the people so that we can also all push and be strategically aligned and move in one direction. So that was the hardest part, right? Was getting all the heads in the room to sort of point in the right direction. So after we did that, we moved into, hey, how do we create a case study, right? So we've been around for, at that point in time, it was about 6 months. And we had 2 data sources already connected in, but we had an awesome use case. So we decided, hey, let's follow down that path. And so we started with talking to top influential leaders within an organization, really setting the stage for us, right? So we wanted to build the momentum, per se, by having these small conversations so that when we had a larger conversation in the end that proposed something, that there was a lot more buy-in, right? So we took that sort of approach. And our case study illustrated basically how we took a used our data lake and asked and helped our sister company basically improve over 6,100%, that's 6,100% an increase of revenue potential. So organic revenue potential, it was just sitting there in the lake, and no one really knew that it was there until we looked under the covers. So funny enough, how that came about was it started as a random conversation, right? So it was one of those water cooler type conversations where it just manifested into a proof of concept. And from that proof of concept, we were able to reduce manual work effort hours by 96%. And it was, a great little win for us, right? And but the coup de grace of it was, more importantly, was our team was able to find more data points, right, that matched this program's requirements. So at the end of the day, we're able to increase, so I said 6,100% before, we were able to increase a revenue projection of 1 million to over 62 million, right? And that's just looking internally and leveraging the power of the lake. So at the end of the day, needless to say, the data perception internally became less of a buzzword, and it became more of an active collaboration where others internally were looking and seeking new use cases. And they're coming to us and saying, hey, where are there opportunities for us to take another step, right? Be it improve business operations, or be it find that new channel product. And so my advice to everybody here is just take that time to take a huge step back and just craft your narrative, right? Because that's super key when you're going into conversations with the C-suite and everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think crafting that narrative is one of the huge lessons that we learned as well too. And when you're communicating, be very clear and use the right nomenclature, because everybody's perception is slightly different in the room, and people will take things well. So if you're not a good storyteller, then it becomes difficult to get that message across. And you see, I think it was back in end of 2019. This news hit my radar because of the business I'm in, but it was a New York Times article. 12 million phones, one data set, zero privacy, right? And for those of you who aren't familiar, it was the story about a reporter who got access to this data, and they were able to track, somebody who was going from home to Microsoft, where they work, home to Microsoft, then home to Amazon, then home to Microsoft. The guy was looking for a job, right? And they could pick that up quite easily in the data. No names, but again, GPS data. So I think, events like that also have the ability to set industry back as well too, because people hear location and they think that right off the bat. So you have to do a good job, I think, of storytelling, of demoing. I think demos have been a huge success for us. So we get our teams to demo, not just in front of the business leaders, but in front of the privacy folks, in front of legal, so that everybody understands this journey that we're on. Because if you don't do that, that's the last thing you heard in the news. That's what's going to be on your mind, and you're going to want to protect when you should be looking at innovative ways to move things forward. So, yeah.
It's funny, as we were working together to prepare for this, we talked about some of those situations where you're getting ready to actually share some data, you're getting ready to apply data in a new way, and then suddenly there's a news story. And the news story feels an awful lot of it. We're all going, oh crap, yeah, we know about that.
Yeah.
And it feels an awful lot like the kind of data sharing you were about to do, simply because people will interpret things, and words can mean different things to different people. But sometimes it's because the same word that you assume means the same thing means something different. There's an organization that I used to work for that had equipment in the field, and one set of equipment used one way of capturing GPS coordinates, and another set of equipment used a different way of capturing GPS coordinates. And both of them are what's called kinetic, meaning that they hit things. And that's not exactly the ideal situation, two different ways of storing GPS coordinates, because that could just go a little bit wrong. So again, communications becomes really critical, and being exact enough or precise enough to be meaningful as you're communicating what you're doing. Yeah, when the news gets you sideways, then you're in trouble. Yeah.
I think a big thing too is just communicating like the wins, right? So we have a lot of wins within our organizations, and I don't think most folks hear about it enough, right? And so they're only hear the news flashes, right? And there's always a new article, something negative in the news, et cetera, right? But it's good to sort of counter that with a few positive wins to really, hey guys, let's settle it all down here, right? We're all moving in the same direction, and this is where we're going, and these are our wins, and we can demonstrate it. So I think having that ability to demonstrate, showcase, and I think that's also important as well.
It might be useful for the audience to hear, in terms of your upward reporting relationships, that opportunity. Could we just come down the line and just talk about who you report to and how often you get to brief the senior most leaders? Wow.
I report to my executive vice president, and we speak daily, and it's a really good communication that we have. And then also with our group president, we have a monthly meeting to really discuss where we're headed. So we're a really small startup. I would call us a startup amongst a big conglomerate. We're $9 billion in revenue, so we're a little blip in the radar. But we have high hopes of where we could go and where we could take our business with being able to have so much access to all this data. And that's sort of the wonderful thing about my position, right? Is I saw the opportunity, and I said, man, it's a little bit of heavy lifting I've learned along the way, right, to sort of set the stage. But once we got the stage set now, I feel like now it's time for us to really look at how do we expand and grow. And we've set now, like I mentioned earlier, my biggest brief now is taking the latest acquisition in Allscripts and how do we really fuse in that data. And that's going to be my next little project.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, so I head up data and analytics for the company, so I have a team of about 120 people. Where Geotab is just over 2,000 people now, so medium-sized enterprise. I report to the CEO, we have our meetings are quite ad hoc, but we have a monthly cadence at the very least with him. I meet very frequently with our chief privacy officer, our data risk committee as needed as well. So I think one of the things that we do well is we're very transparent about all of our operations. I think, like I said in the beginning, we've got a privacy specialist that sits on our team. So I think that has been crucial for imposing privacy by design specifications with the technical teams, right? So that they can be aware of immediately what they should be looking after. But I've seen the whole organization. So I started 6 years ago. We were 200 people with 400,000 vehicles, and now we've grown to almost 3 million vehicles and 2,000 people. So in that short period of time, we've had to adapt our data strategies, how we're going to grow. Under my team, I've got a number of data. You talk about nomenclature and people messing things up or having different interpretations. Data engineer, data scientist. Some organizations think a data scientist works in Excel and that's all they do. So I've got a lot of those kinds of talent within the organization. I handle a lot of product as well too. So I think a different kind of data and analytics department than you would look at across some of my peers, and the fact that we also produce different data solutions and product out of it. So it's not just analytics for the company, but it's analytics for our customers and creating new product. Yeah.
Yeah, so I lead a team called Clinical Advanced Analytics, where, as I said, we're a company of 120,000 employees, plus or minus. But our team is pretty small, so it's about 40 people globally, though. So I do have a global team, and essentially, in our company, we actually differentiate between what we call traditional analytics, or the more routine analytics, and advanced analytics. For us, advanced analytics is all the stats, data science, epidemiology, all of that. So all of that kind of falls in my team. I report into our chief medical officer, who, fortunately for me, I guess, is also a management board member for our company of 120,000 employees. So that's been pretty convenient. And I talk to him. I think I talk to him all the time. We talk to the team all the time. We use Teams extensively for communication. One thing that I think Doug, you mentioned that really reminded me of communicating some of the results on the findings. We're in the medical office, so publications to us are a big thing. Sharing the findings that we're seeing that we can both publish externally, but also share with our internal physician community is very important. So we have a communications team, and I will very often go to them and say, hey, we just published this from, let's say, this global database. Let's do some campaign, which I know very little about, but they're very good at this stuff. So they will propagate some of the information and things that we're seeing, and that there was a publication, so that other people can see, yes, this is the benefit of actually merging some of these data sets. So I will say this whole communication and visibility, I think transparency is really critical for us. Not just what I say to my boss, who again I am sure has bigger things, being a management board member of a $20 billion organization, but really internally, just to make sure that folks are aware of the work that we're doing. That it's not just some group of data scientists hanging around the globe doing things that they find fun to do. So, I mean, that's the reputation, I know. So,
Fun stuff.
yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Just to leave some time for Q&A, we should probably move on. We're all good with that. Before we do, I'll just note that the Executive Advisory Board's sorry, the Executive Advisory Board's actionable framework is available for download, so please feel free to have a look. And if you'd like to contact any of us, oh, sorry.
You gotta go back there.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Let me know when everyone's done. All right.
I'm glad I was done one.
Popular one.
And I'll put our contact information on the next slide if you want to take a picture of that. And then we'll move to Q&A. And I think there was several questions online, but maybe we can start with the room if anybody has any questions. Yes?
I think there's a mic.
Oh,
mic
sorry.
something,
Bring the mic.
So I wanted to ask about the Data Risk Committee, and organizations I work with, I've seen traditionally they only consider the risk of using data in a particular way, and very often that leads to the most conservative uses with zero view of the benefit it can deliver. And so, can you talk a little bit about trying to create balance across, that within the Data Risk Sharing Committee?
I can. Yes, sorry. So the question was around creating balance in the Data Risk Committee and different tactics to do that. As I said, we started off, ours was very heavily weighted on risk because we had, it was composed largely of lawyers. And while I think that's important, you have to have both sides competing. You can have innovation and privacy coexist, absolutely. And so we started so I think the two things that we did was make sure that the composition is balanced. So we brought in folks from the business as well. Business, technical, privacy, and legal are all in that area. But I think more than that, it's the trust that we build up with that area of the organization, right? The fact that our privacy and legal team know that we have a privacy specialist that is working with us, that is moving things forward, that understands that framework that we've developed. I think having that trust allows us to move a one step forward and gets them comfortable with the kinds of things that we're looking at. So I think that combination really, really worked well for us. But it's difficult when you have these events that happen, right? So whether it's a news media or whether there's new legislation. I remember when CCPA first came out, right? We were all on point with GDPR, got our ducks in a row. CCPA comes out, like, okay, well, how does this affect our strategy and change our strategy? And so I think if you don't have that healthy mix of people at the table, your composition is so crucial, I think. Yeah.
Do you mind if I build on that?
Yeah.
I come from a world of software engineering. In the world of software engineering, for every project, we document what are the assumptions we're making about our project plan, our outputs, our capabilities. What are the issues that we're going to have to build into our project plan? These are the things we absolutely know are going to be real, and therefore we have to plan for them. And what are the risks, by which we mean what are the things we don't have confidence in that are unpredictable? They could be the risk of something bad happening, but they could be the risk of something good happening. It's not 100%, therefore it's a risk. What do we want to do to make the good things happen? What are the measures we're going to take? What are the things we want to do to prevent the bad things from happening? What are the measures we're going to take there? And we put probabilities, mathematical, numerical probabilities on things. It's not t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large risk. It's X%. What's the impact of it happening, good or bad? And now I can start to do some math about what are my mechanics going to cost me. If I have a model that says I need to track all three of these, and I need to be mathematical about risks, and I need to be pushing people to document the risk of good things happening as well as bad things happening, I create an environment where I get a more balanced set of considerations in the risk committee or the risk management committee. And it's a very simple, straightforward way of doing it. Despite the fact that we can all make fun of Excel. Excel's not a bad way to track these kinds of things, actually, and communicate them. And you start to create a culture of looking for the risks of good things happening to help mathematically balance the with the positive outcomes, right? Is that helpful? I hope. Yeah.
And I will say just a really quick comment. I realize we're getting close to the time, but I do think the executive buy-in is really important, and the executive support saying this is something that we want to be able to do, so we just need to find a solution as opposed to finding what's wrong with it. So I do think having that buy-in was important. And for us, I will say, I mean, I think working with an external company who is helping us assess our data, I think somehow our 500 attorneys were more comfortable with knowing that it's somebody externally came up with an opinion, because I feel like internally every person has their little task.
Yeah.
All of our attorneys have their task, and they will never say yes. They would rather say, oh, let's do this or let's do this. But when you get an external report that says this is what you should be doing, and the risks become, you know, extremely small, then suddenly like everybody was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's move ahead.
I'll double down on that
yeah,
one as well,
exactly.
too. Yeah, 100%.
I have to say it was a pleasure speaking with the Fresenius lawyers. Not all 500 of them.
A lot of them. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. Something that, Mike, you said before around differential privacy kind of spurs a question, but I think it also goes to you, Doug, and Yulen as well in the healthcare space. Besides differential privacy, are you exploring or utilizing any other types of privacy-enhancing technologies to, I guess, anonymize or de-identify the data in different ways to draw insights? And more specifically, what I mean by that is like using synthetic data or different types of encryption or multi-party compute.
Yeah, I mean, we explore a number of different techniques. Again, it has to be, we look at the use case first and foremost. And it involves everything from aggregation through to, we've explored federated learning in certain cases, specifically when you're looking at regional instances, right? So because a lot of our I mean, we're a global organization, so we have to make sure that, all of the AI algorithms and everything that we have operating off of that data has to happen in each jurisdiction as well too. So we've explored different ways of using federated learning there. Differential privacy, we've also chopped off data sets as well, because for us it's a balance of making sure that the data is highly accurate but also not disclosing that information. So it's varied. If you're looking at synthetic data for us can be helpful in certain circumstances, but in many cases, you need to know the location of an incident at aggregate, right? And that's where it becomes really, really challenging. So I think combining a few of these different techniques with things like motivated intruder attacks and risk re-identity, that really helps us create a solid story.
If I recall our first engagement with Geotab, the rare events were really something that was a concern, right? That the isolated incidents that needed to be found.
Exactly, and for us, it's not even just, so we take it one step further. For us, we're very confident in PII. It's customer data, right? We don't want to disclose anything that has to do with, a customer's operations, right? So that's one layer deeper that we actually have to go, which gets challenging for sure.
We've got one question over here. And then did you also want to do one from the online in the last minute or two?
There were two questions about trust. I think we've covered them, and there was one that was similar to the one that was just asked, so I think we're
one of those was mine. So.
Okay, there we go.
Actually, going off what you just mentioned, in terms of customers and customers' input, in terms of really the data producers, something that we in the open data space are exploring more of how do we take in essentially public input, like from the people creating the data and what they believe it should be shared for and used for. Or in the private space, how do you all incorporate that? Is that in these data risk committees? Is it a focus group? How do you tackle that?
Could you repeat the question to the online? Sorry.
Exactly how I said it.
Who's tackling that one?
Doug, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I guess I have to repeat the question.
So actually, would you mind repeating the question just once again?
Yeah, so I was just asking, basically, how do you solicit customer input, as in the data producers' input, in terms of what they feel comfortable with sharing and use cases for their data?
So the question is how to elicit customer input and the data producer's input, and that's why, Doug, I thought it would be perfect for you because, right, you work with the data producers and you bring it all together.
Absolutely. So, we handle it, so you had mentioned risk committee, so we handle it at that level, right? And in a way, we try to define, what's our use case, right, for the data. And so, there's a lot of terms and that we need users to acknowledge, right, before we're able to use their data at the end of the day. And so there's, my legal team would say there's more than that, Doug. There's all these T's and C's plus other legal documents plus when we're sharing data taking data from other data sources. There's business BAAs that we need to have in place as well. So the whole idea is we do handle it from a risk committee level, but it's really understanding how we're going to use the data at the end of the day, right? So if we're going to share the data, de-identified, of course, and if we're going to share that data with others, the idea is for us to really understand what the consumer of the data, which could be a pharma company wanting to do some clinical research, et cetera, and how will they use it, and what do they need on their side, because their legal teams would want, and they usually want something different than we have in hand, right? So it's just understanding what that handshake looks like, and it's just understand. And every single time there's a share of data, there's usually different requirements from both sides.
Super quick from mine, because I know we're at time. So we have a bit of what we call our analytics lab is our experimentation area. So we engage directly with our customers there. So we have this customer first kind of principle and approach. And it allows us to go out to those customers, elicit feedback through that cycle, and then make sure that we're moving the product in the right direction. So that's kind of our approach.
Nice.
Great. And it looks like we're at time. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to our panelists and co-moderator.